Before you go any further, remember, every story here leaves a scar. You are listening to Whispering Narratives. The story begins now. The first sound wasn't the moon. It was the hinge between who I was and what the dark wanted me to be. Inside, cartilage unbuttoned like a shirt you tear off in fever. Ligaments unspooled, wet and stubborn, then surrendered with a white-hot hiss across the nerves. The cellar's concrete remembered other winters and other beasts. It had a memory for cold, and something in it woke when I did. Chains rasped against the beam, iron filing its complaint against wood. The moon didn't flood in so much as ferment in the cracks. Its light had gone sour in the bottle of the sky. It bled silver in strips across the floor, laid bars onto the shape I still pretended was me. I tasted dust so old it had petrified, into a kind of spice. I tasted iron the way a liar tastes soap. Air thinned, ribs flared. A heat rose under the skin like a growing bruise, swelling with purpose. Every hair stood priest still. My tongue fattened with a new alphabet. Scent, speed, sin. Nails lifted from their beds with a meticulous patience, then split into black hooks, curved for holding what ran. When the jaw slid forward, it did so with the confidence of a drawer that had always been there. My mouth a new room, my breath a saw. I kept one word, please. After that, the beast collected every pronoun and burned them for warmth. Bones made their sermon. The sermon had no forgiveness in it. Cellar stank of old oil and bleach ghosts and the sour sweetness of yesterday's fear. Above, the laundry room hummed like a mind pretending at normal. The house was a choir of familiar noises reciting the tender liturgy of home, and beneath it my body was relearning how to be a weapon. When the eyes went wide, wider, the light became a living thing. It swam. It braided itself around the bars of the chair, around the knock of the bolts, around my fingers that were no longer fingers. In the drown of it, something far away, me, climbed the inside of a well and slipped back down. The climb became a ritual. The slipping became a law. And then the howl, the first of mine. Not a note, not music, not grief. A sound like a tendon plucked by a god with no mouth. Darkness answered. It had been waiting. Morning was thin milk poured over ash. I woke on concrete that held my shape in sweat and blood like paper pressed under glass. Denim tore into tongues. Skin was a map with too many roads. Teeth felt loose but were only longer, and the gums ached where midnight had stretched them. Breathing hurt in a new place, between ribs where the beast had braced itself and pushed. I made myself stand, and my legs remembered having been something faster. The sink gave up a trickle. The mirror gave up nothing but a stranger who looked like a photograph that had slept in a ditch. Eyes swollen with a nocturnal story. Lids scored with the fingernails of bad dreams. Behind my eyes, a roll of film unspooled. Fence wire singing against a running flank. The moon cutting the field into silver stripes. A deer's cry like a violin string snapping. A mouthful of winter air with a vein in it. Each frame burned out as soon as it lit, leaving after-images that crawled away into corners. I reached for the faucet and gripped it too hard. Metal complained and my hand answered by bleeding. I watched the red string down my wrist and thought, this is proof I still have a body. This is also proof I no longer own it. In the living room, glass pebbled the rug under the portrait of my sister. I picked them out of the fibers one by one, each a tiny mirror telling me a fraction of a face. Her smile hadn't cracked. The frame had. I told myself that meant something. Lies are warm-blooded for a moment, if you hold them close enough. A smear on the back door said I'd gone looking. A tuft of coarse hair in the door jamb said I'd come back wrong. The doormat held a story in muddy hieroglyphs. The air had that sweet, coppery aftertaste, the way a mouth tastes after a coin. I swallowed and it came back copper again. The hammer felt good in my hand. It had the weight of decisions. I bought a new bolt and told the door it would hold next time. I told myself the door was a kind of oath and the chain a prayer. I told the floor not to give away my footprints to the next thing that came asking. By noon I'd drawn a moon on a calendar and circled it twice. By evening I'd circled it again. By night I was drafting love letters to locks. Sleep came with shoes on. Days were threads, nights were knives. I knotted what I could and hid the cuts beneath routine. I relearned quiet, the way to set a cup down without it speaking, the way to close a door like a closing eye. Mirrors wore sheets, windows wore plywood smiles. My hands learned kindness to strangers like a second language. Hold the door, don't look too long, leave exact change, say the weather like prayer, looks like rain, hope it helps the grass. I stocked the basement with bleach and buckets, gloves that squeaked, brushes with wire teeth. The drain I installed had a small iron mouth and a stubborn appetite. I fed it what had to be fed. It burped secrets I didn't want to hear. Sleep was an animal with too many legs. It crawled on me in the afternoon, but at night it fled to the ceiling and perched out of reach. I counted the cracks in the plaster, the knots in the beam, the links in the chain. Numbers are a lullaby if you make them tired enough. I sang and nothing slept. On the wall above the tally of moons, I painted words in thick black strokes. Do not believe yourself. Below it, in smaller hand, believe your rules. Under that, the rules again harsher. If dusk knocks, do not answer. If memory smiles, check its teeth. If a voice says, let me in, remember your mouth can lie with your voice. Chain, your kindness to the floor. Bleed on the threshold, doors trust blood. I tried to remember the shape of my laughter. I remembered instead the taste of mint gum chewed into a grit between teeth that were not designed for gum. My clothes began to tell, seams sagging in places where muscle had come to stay, sleeves stretched by a forearm I didn't train. I bought looser shirts and told myself I preferred comfort to style. The public library had a shelf under a dead plant labeled folklore and miscellany. I took the books and found the same word in 100 quiet alphabets. Curse. It's an old word, tired of being explained, but it woke up when it saw me. In a margin, someone had written the first oath was a howl. I closed the book and put it back in the wrong place so it could rest. At the grocery, the butcher wrapped meat with a reverence that made my gums throb. I told myself I bought it for protein. The part of me with night vision smiled. I stopped calling anyone. The phone rang less and less. One day it understood it was a relic and went silent of its own accord. People are polite to monsters as long as the monster is wearing a shirt and looking at its shoes. The less I was seen, the kinder the town became. The less I took up space, the less likely I was to take up their children. Guilt grew like moss, soft to the hand, slippery to the foot. It made the stairs a hazard and the house a chapel. I set candles in the hall and in the bathroom in case the power went out and I needed to see the face I couldn't stand quickly. At dusk, the sky pulled on its gray like a butcher's apron. That color did something simple to my blood. Turned it quick, turned it loud. Dogs 2 streets over discovered religion and began to pray with their throats. I answered them under my breath, not words, not I, not human. I added a 6th rule. Do not name the beast, names are doors. I chose my chains with the deliberation of a man shopping for his last suit. The first set were shiny and wrong, the way a store-bought grief looks. The second had weight and history. You can smell the foundry on metal that means it. I washed them in salt and regret and found they sang more honestly afterward. The cuff bit the ankle. The wrist learned its circle like a wedding band that bruises. The collar was a compromise I told myself I wouldn't make. I made it. It wasn't about comfort. It was about leverage. It taught my throat how to kneel. The hinge on the door spoke a dialect of complaint older than carpenters. I oiled it with a rag that never came clean. When I slid the beam into place, the sound thudded through my arms and up into my teeth. I learned to love that particular thud. It is the sound of a decision sitting down to stay. The cellar learned me. Where I fell first, where I clawed, where I paced, the exact length of the chain's lesson. It knows my drunk walk, the way I list toward the drain at dawn, when the body has paid out all of its night currency. It knows the line my shoulder leaves on the post. It knows the headbutt I deliver when language fails. It knows where the first howl starts in the ribs. On the fourth moon, something new arrived, a voice under my voice trying to practice human with what it had stolen. It got the vowels wrong. E instead of I, off instead of love. It made my hair stand up in places that didn't have hair before. It taught me that the worst thing in language is almost. The hunter appeared in fragments. A parked truck, a silhouette in the tree line, cigarette ember like a red eye slowly blinking, a coffee cup lid chewed into a shape like a crescent moon. He scouted my house as if I were a trout he meant to angle clean and quick. I pretended not to see and sharpened the bolts. He pinned a flyer that said, "Information wanted." Below it, in smaller hand, someone had written, "Mercy is information too." I tore the note down and put it in my pocket and forgot, and washed the pants, and the mercy turned to pulp in my drain. Between moons, the basement smelled like hospital floors and old raincoats. During, it smelled like what the dark smells like when it opens its mouth. I kept a journal, short, block letters, never poetry, because if I tried to sing about it, I would turn my own face into a myth, and myths are excuses. I wrote the facts. Chain length, bolt torque, blood loss, hours unconscious, the way the jaw reset today with a smaller scream. Data can be a rosary if your fingers are stubborn. Sometimes the beast panted with my lungs, and inside the pant was not hunger but searching. For what, I don't ask. The seventh rule wrote itself, do not imagine what it wants. The pharmacy girl had a scar that made her smile brave. Under the fluorescence, her face looked like a storm had passed and left everything sharper. She slid the gauze across with eyes that had already decided not to tell. When she tucked the witch hazel and tincture in, her hand shook, not with fear, with the effort of pretending receipt paper is protection. The pamphlet was printed on cheap stock. Cures always are. The church listed in the back had folded 3 times and still smelled like smoke. When I pushed the door, it opened with a reluctance that felt personal. Candles knelt half-melted along the aisle, and the windows had grown moss instead of saints. In the chancel, a woman spun silver thread out of bells and murmured a prayer to someone who didn't need a name. She told me stories that were older than my dread, about the first man who tore his skin off to survive a winter and learned it grew back with a snarl in it. About the woman who chewed iron nails until her teeth remembered the shape of keys and unlocked her own bones. About oaths that made the blood stand up and listen. You are not a cliff, she said. You are a river in a gorge. The banks can be built. She tied the bells around my wrist with hands that had pulled children out of burning kitchens and drunk men off bar floors. Ritual is a lever, her fingers said. Leverage is mercy made mechanical. At home, I boiled the bark tea and watched the steam write unreadable letters. I drank and felt the edges sand a bit. Not enough to save anyone. Enough to make a second thought. Arrive before the sprint. Hope is a painkiller measured in heartbeats. On the 5th moon, the deer stood close enough that I could count the lines in its eye. Everything in me reached with spears. The bells sang a single chime, not loud, not dramatic, the way a mother clears her throat at the back of a room. The beast froze and, confused, looked for a mother. It found a wall. It found the chain. It found my voice inside the growl, saying a word it didn't know but honored, no. I slept in pieces that morning, each piece the size of a hand. When I woke, the chain had left its handwriting on my ankle. I traced the letters and they spelled stay, the hunter's rosemary smell braided with grease and leather and dog. He was closer now, picking up my shed words from the woods, piecing me together like a butcher from scraps. He left another note under a stone that had learned rain the hard way. You're fighting it. Good. Fight better. The stone had a rust stain like a wound that lost its argument. Hope got teeth, not big ones, not enough to chew the moon, but sharp enough to tug on my sleeve when I ran too far toward an ending with gunpowder in it. Snow neutralizes a lot of sins. It also tattles. Every step becomes a sentence, every pause an adjective, every circle a question mark. The hunter's truck wrote its paragraph up my drive. He got out slow, the way men do when they very much do not want to spook whatever is in the bushes. He had a hat the color of arguments and eyes that had lost a bet with sleep a long time ago. He smelled like rosemary, to cover the other smells or to ward something off. He smelled like a garage where a dog naps and a man remembers he has a gun. He smelled like the type who believes in clean kills and worse mercy. I liked him and hated him with the same breath. "You're building a dam," he said, nodding toward the cellar door. "Rivers still flood. I sandbag. Most drownings happen within sight of the shore. We talked the way two men talk when they both own a secret, and one of those secrets is breathing hard under the floor." The bells on my wrist stayed quiet, a good omen or an exhausted one. His boots wrote new grammar into the snow. He was making sure I could see every comma. "I don't want to kill you," he said. "That's neighborly. I want less funerals. Those two desires don't always wear the same coat." "If I break," I said, "don't preach, just do it fast." He nodded. The wind moved between us like a resigned dog. "I'll be at the creek bend," he repeated, as if repetition were a law that could make his hands shake less later. That night the chain took me with a clean grip, as if it respected the craft I'd put into its fittings. The bells murmured when the jaw went wide. The taste in my mouth went metallic and medicinal, and then meat. The cellar's dark got a pulse. The collar put its question to my throat, and my throat answered with an agreement that left bruises. Footsteps in snow, soft. Too soft for a hunter, lighter. The girl, some other kindness wandering where kindness shouldn't. The beast went too. Full heat like a forge opened. The door bowed as if it considered heroism. The bolt groaned but kept its faith. I felt my hands becoming something with paws and counted the bottles on the shelf to 5, then again, because numbers have a spine, even when I don't. A scent, like a field of rosemary, knocked all other data out of the air. The beast hesitated. Confusion isn't mercy, but it buys the same minutes. I turned that hesitation into a weapon. I dragged the chain across my own throat and sat into it and pulled until stars broke open like eggs inside my skull. The collar bit rings into my voice. My eyes watered words I couldn't make. Outside, the soft feet retreated, prints shrinking back into themselves like the world changing its mind. I bled out the panic into the collar and let it hold the trembling. Mercy isn't a feeling here. It's leverage. It's the lock that keeps the bullet in the hunter's gun, because there isn't a funeral to attend tomorrow. Dawn bothered its way through the window crack and kissed the steam rising off my body. I woke swallowing pennies, cuff marks tattooing, new sermons around my wrists. The door bowed like a sick tree but didn't break. The snow recorded a near miss in careful cursive. I made coffee. The mug knocked against the counter, a small bell that told me I was still allowed to hold breakable things. Some moons are commandments engraved in light. The 7th rose like a priest's knife. It wasn't red. Red isn't faithful enough, a word. It was the color of hot iron plunged into cold water and the scream that water makes. The town bell doubled itself on the hour, then rang once late, then not at all, remorseful and scared. Everything sensible in the body went to ground. What remained boiled. I performed the ritual like a surgeon shaving a patient. Meticulous, quiet, terrified, pretending that confidence belongs here. Bleed on the jam. Speak the old words the old woman ladled into my ear. Check the bolts by touch, not sight, because eyes lie under moons like this. The candles guttered, and then decided to try. The bells twitched, small bones of light. Outside, the woods woke strange. Not just the wind's gospel, but backs breaking in the brush, something big testing the grammar of the tree line. The night had invited cousins. Their breathing wrote a round. Every inhale had teeth inside. I fed my neck to the collar and let it teach me again. The chain coiled a thesis around my chest. The cuff found the ridge at my ankle and sat there like an attentive thumb. I knelt, not out of reverence, because kneeling keeps you lower than the doorframe if it goes. When the change hit, it took all the careful math and lit it on fire. Bones popped their buttons, sprouted extra stitches. A seam in the shoulder separated with a warm, oily relief. The hips relearned their rotation and discovered a joy in it that made me hate myself. Nails grew, split, grew again, not content with being almost. The jaw unhinged and then found a new hinge on a better, older axis. My tongue lost words and found the blood's dictionary. The cellar became an instrument. It played my body like a bow. Concrete thrummed under paw. The chain sang, the beam groaned its harmony. The howl climbed the room and put a window in the roof, and through its stars screamed back into place. Then came the knock, not on the door, on the inside of my skull. A sound like knuckles rapping bone. Inside the howl, inside the pant, inside the frenzy. Something asked to be let in. Not human, familiar. Other throats answering, other feet circling the bulkhead, other hearts going like rabbits. The night had become a relay station and I was its tower. The knock came again. I wanted to open. Footsteps in snow again, wrong cadence, wrong weight. A child? No. Dear? No. Something that had learned to walk, like Mercy, wearing Mercy's gait, like a stolen coat. It paused at the door. The chain went banjo string tight. The collar reached its lesson. The bolts creaked. Wood bowed. The beam complained in a voice a carpenter would recognize as last words. I couldn't trust ritual anymore. Ritual was glass, and the moon had picked up a hammer. I reached for what remained. Pain. A lever always. Works. I dragged the chain behind my back and set it against the spine. I leaned until the world narrowed to a white hallway, and a bell somewhere far away rang once and then once inside my ear. Spots of new constellations floated and reassembled. I didn't pass out. Passing out would have been Mercy, and Mercy had better places to be. The knot deer moved away. The other throats receded. The woods unclenched, disappointed. My breath learned to work around a bruise that would last in colors artists liquor themselves to remember. The collar's metal smelled like pennies and prayer. When dawn climbed back onto the edge of the world, the door had a crack down its face like a tear that dried without being wiped. My wrists were bracelets of meat. My ankle was a lit stove. The beam would need replacing. The beam had done right by me. I put my forehead to it and said the only word left that meant anything. Stay. After the blood moon, life doesn't resume. It limps. The hunter's truck idled at the end of the road for an hour and then left. In the mailbox, nothing. The quietest threat. In the pharmacy bag, gauze, tape, a candy someone had slipped in out of habit. A small mercy, the kind that could get a person killed. The old woman's death came in a whisper of ash and a candle that sputtered, then drew itself up, proud and tall. I stood in the church that had learned to be patient with ruin and listened to wax speak grief in a warm tongue. The bells on my wrist chimed once when her name was said. The sound went out the broken steeple and found whatever sky still believed in listening. I replaced the cellar door. I sanded the frame until the wood's grain felt like a palm. I set the new beam with hands that had learned the weight of a head. I oiled the hinges, told them their job, asked them to exceed it. Doors are not gods. They are agreements. I renewed the contract with blood where it can see. I tried to remember living like this was manageable. It isn't. It's survivable. Survivable is a poor cousin, but it brings bread. The dog that slept on the bulkhead returned once more, then vanished into its own life, having taught me that even strays choose their battles. On good mornings, coffee tasted like coffee again, and not like a chemical designed to punish. On bad Mornings, the cup was heavy as a verdict. Mercy stayed sharp. I kept it honed by doing small things to keep people far away from my circle of failure. A broken light at the end of the path that made the lane look unwelcoming. A no trespassing sign, less for law than for manners. A habit of mowing at odd hours, so neighbors thought I was off. A smile that told the mailman I was fine, so he'd stop wondering if he should do something. I built a kit in a bag at the foot of the cellar steps. Tourniquet, tape, wire cutters, epinephrine, a length of rope for when the chain decided to improvise, a hammer, 3 nails, a folded letter addressed to nobody that said, "If I have failed, do what must be done." I sealed it with wax and pressed the old woman's church key into it. It looked official enough to be obeyed by a stranger in shock, which is what a hunter is at the end of his job. On the 9th moon, the beast tried a new trick. It spoke my sister's name almost right. The vowel was soft, the syllables stuck together, like wet paper. It said it from the wrong mouth and my spine folded around it. I added an 8th rule to the wall in letters big enough to frighten me sober. Do not answer your name. On the 10th, snow returned and softened the world into something undecided. The beast lay down on the concrete and pressed its chest to the cold because the cold was a law older than hunger. I pressed my palm to the scruff of my own neck from the inside and felt the body flinch like a dog that knows better than to hope. Hope came anyway, ugly and loyal. On the 12th, the door finally split where it had threatened to. Not a break, more a confession. I replaced it, not because new wood would stop the red iron of the moon, because men in prisons hand sand their tables for a reason. The work teaches the hands to stay. I stained the door with something that smelled like the inside of a good church and promised it a quiet life. It agreed with the humility of an object. I slept in the afternoons sometimes, upright in a chair in the kitchen, and dreamed of running on all 3s and one idea, and woke with teeth sunk into my own tongue. Houses keep ledgers. Mine wrote in dust. It balanced accounts in rust and flakes of paint. It tallied in hair woven into the bristles of a broom. When I sat on the back steps and watched the field gather fog, the house breathed with me, old wood in, old wood out. It had forgiven worse things before I was born. It forgave me in silence because that is what houses do when they agree to hold your kind of trouble. Floorboards memorized my apology weight. The hallway remembered the exact pace of regret. The lock knew the shape of my hand when it was about to shake. The kitchen kept trying to smell like soup and instead smelled like boiled painkillers and metal. The refrigerator light was the brightest mercy in the house, and it made everything look like honest plastic, the only texture that tells no stories. In the attic, a box of my sister's letters pressed against insulation. I didn't open them. Letters are engines. You pull the cord and they roar old places into now. I wasn't safe for engines. Still, the box warmed under summers and cooled under winters and waited with the patience of paper. I lived like a man with a bomb under the floor that ticks only when the moon is wrong, and paperwork sitting neatly upstairs explaining why I used to deserve love. The house didn't judge. The house knew a thing or two about holding everything wrong about a person and letting them try again anyway. The house said, "Keep the roof tight, and you can grieve in peace." The hunter didn't keep his promise entirely. He came once at noon, when men make plans they wouldn't dare in moonlight. He stood at the edge of the yard, hat in hand, and looked at the house as if it were a friend he needed to ask a terrible favor of. I stepped out, and the day pretended to be innocent, sun a pale, unconvincing coin in a white sky. "Storm coming," he said, nodding at nothing. "They find us here," I said. "Storms." He rubbed a thumb along the hat brim. The rosemary on him had faded, replaced by something medicinal and thin. "You're doing it right," he said. "Mostly, but mostly ain't armor." "I know. How many times have you—" He stopped. Something in his jaw refused the rest of that sentence. 12, I said. "Some of them were moons, some were knives." He nodded. "The thing about men like me, He looked at the creek bend as if it remembered his name. I've put things down that didn't deserve to stand. I've put things down that did. I'd prefer not to add to either ledger if I can help it. Your ledger isn't the only one, I said, touching the bells under my sleeve. He left me a coil of wire he said was unbreakable. Nothing is. But it lasted longer than some hopes, and that counts for more than people admit. He told me not to call when it got bad. He said if I had breath to call, I had breath to hold on. Some mercies are brutal because they're true. The rosemary came back the night before the 13th moon. It came in on the wind like a choir boy sneaking a cigarette. The beast lifted its head far below and inhaled a memory that smelled like mechanical prayer. I chained myself with the wire until I couldn't feel my hands and thanked a man I might someday have to make aim at my face. I tried leaving once, not the town, the house. The hours just before dusk are called the Red Run in old stories. The hour and a half when the beast can smell the shadow of the moon before the eye finds it. I leashed myself with the wire, locked the cellar, and got in the truck. I drove 2 miles to an old quarry and parked on gravel that kept the ghosts of machines. The wind off the water smelled like batteries. I took the wire down to a rusted ring some idiot had bolted to a slab for reasons that made sense before the world turned to this. I wrapped it and sat, and the quarry counted the geese, above as if their bodies were rules in motion. The moon slid up in the fickle way it does, pretending to look surprised to find itself there. The chain said now before the light reached my skin. I went to all fours in a second that lasted forever, and then not long enough. The wire held. The ground didn't. The slab cracked. The ring gave way. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just metal changing its mind about allegiance. I took the ring and the wire and a sheet of stone and half the night and ran. The wire cut my hands to a red grammar that the quarry understood and repeated back to me against every wall. The cliff face interrupted with a tree. I hit it. I don't. Remember the next part. The beast does. In the morning, fishermen found a broken ring and a chain that had braided itself into a shape like a prayer wheel. They forgot what they'd seen by lunch because mercy sometimes wears the face of boredom. I limped home through the industrial stink of a town that for a while had made things men could drop on their feet and curse about. The house took me back, without saying I told you so. It is the kind of house that lets the lesson come from pain if pain insists. I never tried the quarry again. The cellar, for all its failings, loved me in the narrow way prisons do, with purpose. Winter grew bones. The chain learned a new note in the cold, tight and bright and ugly. The collar burned when breath steamed it, and then cooled to a ring of winter around my voice. On 0 nights, the beast lay down quick, because the floor told it a story it couldn't argue with. You will die if you rage that way. Rage rose anyway and met the floor and had to compromise. I called that mercy by another name. Nature did the work I could not. There's a marrow ache that comes with this life when the temperature drops below certain numbers. It feels like your skeleton wants to confess to a crime it can't remember and hopes the confession will make the pain stop. The full moon's arithmetic stacks on top and multiplies. 2 pains singing a harmony that does not improve for being harmonious. The house groaned in the night like an animal rolling in sleep. The pipes knocked. The wind thread whistled under the door. Every sound had claws in it. I counted down like a man waiting to be shot by a fair firing squad and tried to stand in the right place in myself so the bullet would do its job. After, I poured salt along the threshold as if the old stories would come true if I just wanted them enough. I swept it up in the morning and poured it again, ritual for its own sake because the hands need something to do other than shake. Some nights, between the worst of it and the first blue seam of morning, something happens that I won't name. Miracle because I'm not greedy. The beast puts its head against the concrete. Breath slows. The chain goes slack. The collar stops rattling. In that hush, if I dare, I hum. Not a song I remember, something made of vowel and ache. It isn't pretty. It's a lullaby for teeth. It says nothing but stay and stay in 100 vowel shapes. The beast listens the way animals listen when they're pretending not to be listening. The ear notches forward, the eye half lids. For 3 minutes, a lesson holds. It doesn't convert into goodness. Goodness is a coat I stopped owning. It converts into not killing. That's devotion enough for a creature like me. I don't know if this can be taught. I only know pain teaches some things, and repetition others, and tenderness. A tenderness so thin only a knife edge separates it from cruelty, teaches the rest. The wolf's prayer, if it exists, is this: let me be leashed to something I chose. I added one more rule to the wall, big crooked letters, black paint that gleamed like a wet eye. If you can still count, you can still hold. I make myself read it when the bolts look like candy bars in a starving man's pocket. I say it when the chain tries to sell me a softer story. I whisper it when the bell rings inside the chest to tell me my name and the voice wants to answer. It isn't a hero's rule. It's a janitor's. It keeps the floor clean enough that the next man who must come through, hunter or priest or some poor neighbor, doesn't slip on what I have spilled. There's a field beyond the tree line where the fog sits like a trial that hasn't started yet. On clean mornings I stand at its edge and count my breath until it believes me. The bell in town learned my rhythm. It rings without scaring me now. I think someone fixed its rope, or maybe I did, in a dream I'm allowed to keep. I won't call this redemption. Redemption is a ledger, and I'm not allowed near ledgers. This is management. This is custodial. This is the steady hand of a man who knows which way the hinge swings and steps clear in time. Sometimes I see the hunter at the feed store. He pretends to look at nails. I pretend to look at seed. We nod, which is a way of saying, the dam held. He still smells like rosemary. I wonder if he likes it, or if he wears it like a uniform. We will die like this. Him with clean boots he refuses to clean twice in a row, me with a wrist that rings in rain. It isn't romance. It's a truce that got old enough to be furniture. The pharmacy girl doesn't slip anything in the bag anymore. That's respect. She charges me for everything and asks about the weather like she's arming me with a weapon I can carry into small talk. I tell her the sky looks like it might finally make good on its threat to snow. She smiles, and the scar reminds me that the face can heal into a story that keeps scaring what needs scaring. At night, when the moon minds its own business, the house sleeps. I can hear it. Boards breathing, pipes sighing, the refrigerator bragging about its new motor. I sit in the kitchen and drink coffee I let go cold on purpose. I look at the cellar door. It looks back. We have an understanding the way old married people do. You lock, I hold. When the wrong moon comes, I go below. I don't ask, I don't wish, I don't tell myself pretty stories about futures where I can take a vacation from what my body knows. I bleed the threshold, I say the names. I set the collar with a gentleness that would make sense if I were kneeling at a crib. I pull the chain, I hold, I hold, I hold. And somewhere not in heaven, not in hell, but in the narrow, wind-torn throat between them, a bell rings once and a wolf bows its head because the man it lives inside decided to keep the world intact for one more night. Empathy does not absolve, it anchors. If you can feel the monsters shiver and still choose the lock, you have not solved the problem. You have learned how to carry it. The field beyond the tree line knows my footprints by heart. Someday it will learn the absence of them with the same calm. Until then, if you stand here at dawn and listen hard enough, you will hear bones settle, like rafters in a storm. You will hear a chain grow quiet. You will hear the house. And beneath it all, the heart, stubborn, overworked, keeping its drum for whoever needs it next. The story fades, but the echo doesn't. You've been listening to Whispering Narratives, where every heartbeat remembers the dark. If you felt a monster breathe beside you tonight, leave your mark. Like, share, subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another hinge is waiting to open.